All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Thrive Masterclass. I want to thank you so much for joining us. You will all get the recording at the end of this. So if you lose connection for any reason or you have to leave, do not worry. We really appreciate so many of you joining us live because Paul and I were just discussing before you all came in. Fernanda's like, it's 6 a.m. here. Fernanda, where's your coffee? There it is. Good girl. All right. So, the more live people we have, the more interactive it is, the more questions we encourage, the more involvement. It just is, it's better all round. Selfishly, it's better for us as presenters, but I really do feel like you guys get more out of it as well. So we have a little presentation, so I am going to be sharing my screen with you so that we can show you what we have planned today. And Paul is also going to do quite a lot of the talking to talk to you about 21st century anatomy, pain, and the pelvic foot. It's not a typo. We have actually called it the pelvic foot. And Paul will be able to talk to you about that in more detail about why we decided to go that route. Every single time I type it, I get an email going, there's a typo. You put pelvic foot, not pelvic floor. And I have to kind of explain why it's the pelvic foot and no longer the pelvic floor. So we're going to go for about 60 minutes. We're going to deliver you guys as much info as we can. With someone else in the waiting room, admit them. And then from there, we will let you know if you want more information, where you can get more information. All right. Because we can't possibly tell you everything we know in 60 minutes. If you have any questions as we're going along, you can either unmute yourself and shout at us. That is totally fine. We love a bit of that. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you can type in the chat box and I will present your question for you. All right. Let me share the screen. Swear I know how to do this after 2 years online. All right. I'm going to minimize you guys. I'm going to go to present mode. Present. And there it is. All right. Just got someone else entering the room. Perfect. So as I said, welcome to today's presentation with Paul Thornley and myself. Paul, this came about, didn't it? This is a bit of a brainchild when Paul and I were both in separate countries, locked away during the depths of COVID and lockdown. We'd both worked together previously in a studio, and we'd stayed in contact, and we loved working together, but we wanted to know how we could further people outside the repertoire and outside of biomechanics and evolving on and really teaching people to teach the client they see in front of them rather than a set of repertoire, a set of movements that are pre-planned and very much a cookie cutter method. So today we want you to take away some of the theoretical and practical tools that we have learned over our experience levels of years and years and years put together. I won't be giving too much of our ages away. And now what we work with the Thrive team, we've got Awa here who has just completed her 12-week Thrive mentorship with us. And we keep the Thrive team moving together. So we keep dipping back in and out of the training. We keep them accountable on a Facebook page. We all share experiences together. And it's really a community that we've created, not students and mentors. So today we can't possibly talk to you about all 12 weeks of Thrive, but we're going to just touch and scrape the surface of just 3 of those weeks. So get rid of your phones, give yourself this hour to sit back, to absorb as much information as possible, take notes, grab a drink. That is not a vodka tonic. That is a glass of water. Okay. It's 1 o'clock. It's only lunchtime. So when Paul and I were thinking of putting together Thrive, we decided to sit and chat and talk about what are the most key areas that instructors, if they've gone, say, down the Pilates route or down the personal training route or down the yoga route, whatever way you've gone down as a movement professional, what are the things that you just are not really equipped to deal with, or you just don't have a deep enough understanding of to deal with? And it was really hard to narrow it down to 12, but we managed it. And these are those 12. Okay. They're really exciting. We're going to talk to you about these 3 today. But first of all, before we go there, on our very first Thrive intake, we had the lovely Emma. And she just tells you here a little bit about what Thrive enabled her to do. So she is Pilates trained. I don't remember. I think she trained with Stott. I don't remember exactly who she trained with, although that doesn't really matter. We have movement professionals from every modality join us. We have therapists. We also have students who just want to learn a little bit more about the human body join us. All right. So she was able to take all the information she learned in Thrive and really apply it, because what we don't do in Thrive is just give you theory. We are really practical. We do workouts every week in the live Q&As as we're going through, and we get you to think critically about why you're saying the things you're saying. How does that make the client feel? And really questioning you and your sometimes outdated beliefs. Okay. And that's not because you are outdated. That's because what they're still teaching in some of these movement courses is slightly outdated. Okay. So does any of this sound familiar? I want you guys to pop in the chat box if any of what I've just said from what Emma's mentioned, does any of this sound familiar to you guys? Are you guys finding that you're almost constrained by a group of rules or a repertoire or anything like that? If you could just type that in the chat box for me, that would be awesome. And then we'll get going. I was typing. Someone's driving. So whoever's driving, I can't see who that is. Catherine, do not type. All right. Oh, Catherine, she's typed. Oh, I'm impressed. Definitely. Busted. Patricia, no, Fernanda, sorry, says it does. Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. Okay. So today we're probably going to let you know what stands in the way of you becoming an extraordinary instructor. All right, so this is Paul Thornley's slide because it's dark, it's not white. You can always tell the difference between our slides. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Paul. I am assuming you all know Paul, but if you don't, Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Paul, and I'm a neuromuscular therapist, and have been for some 20 years now. And as part of my therapy training, I also then entered the world of Pilates and was a lead IT for the Merrithew Health and Fitness Group for some time, until I decided that I didn't believe I was thriving within the environment I found myself in, and I needed to break free the constraints of the role I'd found myself in, which was very fulfilling for a number of years, but I found myself quite suffocated by trying to meet and match somebody else's business plan, which went really against all of the education I'd learned over those 20 years. And as such, I always explain about when we're going on this, when people say, why would I do Thrive and why do I need to keep up my continuing education? It's because it's a journey. And in our world, in our industry, it should be a continuous, never-ending journey. And that journey will have lots of twists and turns and lots of great experiences, lots of frustrations and lots of successes. But it's on that journey you start to meet different people who influence you, people whose educational standards and approaches might really mirror or match your aspirations to help you thrive in the environment you find yourself in. And likewise, you might come across other educators that rub you up the wrong way and their approach doesn't make sense. Either way, on your journey, you'll find lots and lots of great characters along the way. And out of each experience you do on your education, you're going to pick up something that should hopefully fulfill that need to keep you curious and answering any of the questions that are coming up as you find them. So as I just give you a little brief one, like I say, I'm doing 20 years, and my most senior member of my life, education-wise, is my martial arts instructor. I've known him since I was 7, and I'm quite proud of my age, so I'm now 52. And as I enter my 52nd year here, I try to make sure that I can do the thing I love doing, and that's martial arts. I absolutely adore it. It's the thing that gives me my sanity. And I've seen many people come and go, injured and quit over the years. And as I got into the world of therapy and became somewhat of a chronic pain specialist, is where I found myself being directed to by my education and my mentors. I wanted to know, why do people keep getting hurt? Why was it so frequent that people get hurt if the training model that is bread and butter around the world, is so current and it's so apt and it's so based in evidence that it's good for us, why is everybody so bloody broken? And why are we not able to enjoy the very things that we really endear us to our lifestyles and whatever that happens to be? So of course, I then started to pay more attention to my mentors and ask more questions. And continually for maybe for the last decade now, I go on cadaver courses. And like last year, for instance, I invest heavily in my own education so that I can stay current and stay ahead of the curve because I'm learning off the very people that are creating that educational curve, the ones that are doing the research. So you get to hear it from the horse's mouth and you get to question it directly so that I have clarity over it as a movement provider. My job is to interpret how people currently move, why they're experiencing difficulties, and then offer them a different strategy so that it helps alleviate any inhibitions and dysfunctional patterns that they're creating and make sure that it enhances and embraces the efficiency that they really should be attaining on a day-to-day basis. So as I go through, then I then met John Sharkey, who is my main senior mentor now in the world of physiology. And since day one, we literally threw the biomechanical book out of the window because it's not that it wasn't a great mapping tool for traditional academics for the last 500 years. It served its purpose and it continues to do so in the world of science. But the one thing science tells us, we know nothing. We only know what we know right now. And the whole point of science, which is a bedrock of civilization, is that it's always allowing us to explore more. And we never know everything. And that's a good thing. So if you're finding what I'm explaining to you today contradictory to what you currently know, that's okay. Yes, I'm not trying to change your mind. My job as a tutor is to share you how I've clarified my own mind on my learning journey. And I share that with you with confidence so that you can then make a decision yourself about how you influence your journey and whether I'm the type of educator that you would like to influence that path. And should you decide to come in this particular direction where we try to, as movement people, move away from this misleading representation of anatomy and physiology, which is based in biomechanics, and come and understand what we're actually made of, which is a material which is encapsulated in a word called fascia, which is a terrible word for what we really are, for what fascia was originally designed to describe, which we'll get to in more details shortly, but also understanding the actual living forces in nature that everything in the whole known galaxy and universe must comply to and do comply to. We cannot avoid that. And they are forces of compression and tension. And understanding these forces, these living forces that we are part of nature and we are embodied to, we cannot separate ourselves from. Understanding that those forces are brought to life in the medium of understanding fascia rather than the muscular skeletal system, we then end up with a fascia integrity concept. So that's the medium that brings those invisible forces to life and allows us to exist at all in the very environments we love to thrive within. So that's a short synopsis of my journey.
Yeah. And I think when Paul said, it's not our job to change your mind. We're not saying necessarily everything you know is wrong, and now you've got to change it to what we're saying. But what we've experienced with the first 2 or 3 intakes of Thrive, I think we may have had now, is that people come back to us and go, I tried things your way, and it created the most incredible results for my clients or themselves if they tried it on themselves.
This is true. Well, it's like this, everything works until it doesn't. And so you need options. It's not like our way is the ultimate way. Although I do believe that our approach and the particular approach that I've personally molded into every hour of every day of my working life, and it will continue to evolve, is considerably more effective than what I was taught 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And without knowing that and challenging the very essences of what I learned along that journey, it is, otherwise we would still be teaching things from 100 years ago. Technology has advanced beyond recognition over the last 100 years, but the worlds of anatomy and physiology have changed almost nothing in 500 years. And this is crazy. There's more technology change in a phone in the last 4 months than there has in any textbooks in anatomy
Yeah.
and physiology. So knowing that, it's okay to question it, and you will then get people who are quite defensive about it. So it's important that we're not creating a row, that we're creating a conversation. And it's
Mm.
through conversation that we have to then understand our language. And language, and as instructors of movement, we have to understand how we explain things. So developing a language that is expressive of the way you understand and interpret your anatomy and physiology is what sets us apart. So on Thrive, what we endeavor to do is investigate how you currently cue based on your current understanding of anatomy and then applied physiology from a biomechanical perspective, and show you the transition of moving away from that limiting and very narrow field of view of teaching into a much more unique way of expressing interpretation of the individual that you're going to come across. And because when you investigate the individual that's in front of you and why they're there in front of you in a group class or a private class setting, you can then start to see things very differently. And when you see things differently because you're looking from a different perspective, you need to have a different dialogue that reflects that interpretation, which is non mechanical and very much living organic representation of that person's movement. And that's again is why we're developing this ongoing dictionary, if you like, which is globally being enhanced around the world so that we make sure we have the right dialogue to explain the right model. Because unfortunately, what's happening, why it gets confusing, people keep using mechanical references to talk about organic movement. And this is why people then get confused and why it's misleading when people start talking about fascia, which is an omnidirectional, global, intertwining embryotic fascia tissue, and they try and talk about it from a musculoskeletal lever and fulcrum based position.
Mm.
And this is why it's missing. So you must separate the two. So you have a clear distinction about what you're talking about and how the worlds do merge gently from a mapping perspective. But understand this, biomechanics is a language and model of convenience, but is not a representation of the reality that we are.
Yeah. All right. So as I mentioned before, Paul and I really struggled to get 12 to narrow it. We could have gone on for a year, couldn't we really, Paul, with the 50
There's
case
endless topics you can choose, but this was a nice
Yeah.
suitcase or
Yeah.
toolbox to prepare you and set you aside. So, for instance, if you do whatever certification you bring with you, or if you're just like a lot of the clients that come online say, "Can I join Thrive?" I say, "Absolutely," because if you're participating in being instructed and you have a better understanding of yourself, then you receive information better and you utilize it better. So this, and you also hold the instructors more accountable, bearing in mind if you know a little bit more about yourself. So when they start using just keywords like engage your core, recruit your glutes, stabilize your shoulder, what on earth does that mean if they don't give it a description? And if you have a better understanding of yourself, you can challenge that explanation, that language more appropriately so that it makes sense when you're in an active motion.
Mm.
But yeah, so it's important that we have this toolbox. And what it will do, just like when you drive your car and you get your certificate of competency that you can get in a motor vehicle and not kill somebody if you stick to the rules of the road, then all of a sudden your training stops there. Like when you get your certificate of whatever it is you're training in, Pilates, yoga, resistance training, whatever. But then it's really important that you enhance that with further education. And how you layer that education onto your foundational certificate is important. But it's very hard to transition from a biomechanical certificate that you earned and you own and you had to study for to then transition and go, well, that doesn't make sense now if I add this to it. So it's very important that you understand that path of evolution in understanding so that you can then interpret, which then you can then share. So that's why we narrowed it down to these encapsulated 12 modules, because they all interlink. Although they're separate conversations, we're talking about the very same thing throughout, which is why over 12 weeks you get plenty of time to answer questions that pop into your head or to get these light bulb moments that you didn't quite get on the first couple of modules, but on module 4 or 5, you might go, oh my God, it all makes sense now. And everybody will pick it up at their own pace. But it is a fact of the matter that is, if you're challenging your brain to challenge what you currently understand, it will either reinforce it or it will challenge in a way that it makes sense to move away from it. And then that way you make an educated choice and you become the very thing you're trying to become in your profession, which is an instructor.
Yeah.
Like you'll want to become a master chef, learn your ingredients, and then know what magic you can create from them.
Yeah. We've basically just covered that. So when we dive into 21st century anatomy and physiology, that it's kind of a then versus now situation. This is what we used to believe, that we were essentially a building, and we use cues such as stack the spine and straighten and hinges, right, Paul?
Well, it's not a case of it's what we used to and what we do. This is exactly where we go.
I'm here.
My screen's gone completely blank.
Oh no, can you still hear me? Oh, now he's on mute. Okay. Oh, don't you love technology? Let me just type to Paul Thornley. Hey guys, can everyone hear me? Just type in the chat if you guys can hear me.
I can hear.
I'm
Okay,
back now. It
Oh,
just
he's
went
back.
very funny.
No worries. All right, so talk to us about something I know you love, biomechanics.
Well, it's not that I don't love it. It doesn't make sense.
Mm.
So it's okay for scientists to use a biomechanical model, and that's their language of convenience that they've all owned and become a doctor at. This is amazing. And they learn the chemistry and they learn the neurology through it. But it doesn't make sense as a human movement because we don't move in any of these ways.
No.
Yes, we are not two-dimensional, a musculoskeletal system. This is a system that was created out of convenience because the omnidirectional tissue that is absolutely everywhere in your body is too confusing to add mathematics to. So they disregarded it hundreds of years ago. Yes, but if you disregard something, you sacrifice the most prolific tissue in your body other than skin, and you remove it, then how can you understand what role it plays in your scientific evidence?
Mm.
And it's very important. And of course, over the last 100 years, fascial research has really enhanced the value of this tissue. And that's why it's important that we now look at how we are being taught from a two-dimensional, which means you're lever-based, means you're a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's based on hard matter physics when everything in your body is made of soft matter evolution, of embryonic tissue. Yes,
Yeah.
it is it's based on non-living structures. Does that make sense? So it's really important that we look at what we're really truly made of and how our body configures itself and grew itself so that we can see how unique we've become. Because not one of us is the same, although we're very similar. Often you'll find no structures in the same place on two people on the planet, but they're in a similar region. And you're growing yourself consistently. Your body is consistently adapting to the life forces you're asking it to tolerate and endure on a day-to-day basis. So when we look at how people are taught and look at the outcomes that happen, it's very easy when you understand anatomy from a four-dimensional perspective. You get to see how things are invaginated inside and how they created their tissue specificness to their specific area. So that definition changed as you grew yourself. But ultimately, we're made of the very same tissue. It just changed densification and specificness depending on the location it needed to live in and enhance within the environment of you. Make sense?
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that.
Any questions, guys?
Oh, there you go. There's I think for also, Paul, when we do a whole module on this, on how to look at where we came from, we need to look back to embryology, right?
Well, without understanding embryology, how do you understand anatomy?
Yeah.
And this is where the bedrock and foundation of your mechanics comes from, is because you learn your anatomy, all of you learned anatomy from an adult perspective. It's an adult skeleton you see. It's an adult representation of the anatomy you're going to talk about and the movement patterns you're going to try to create as functional.
Mm.
But all of that came from an embryonic beginning, and embryonics grew itself. It's self-organized, it's self-regulated, it's self-evolved, and it did it in the round. Every single thing in your body has round curvature to its characteristics. But everything you get taught in your traditional anatomy and view of anatomy is based on straight lines, levers, and angles of movement in degrees. And we don't take into account morphology and rotation and chirality because it's challenging. And so what we've done, we've made a very simple concept of biomechanics, but made it incredibly complicated to learn and add physics and all sorts of dramatic mathematics. But what in reality is the hugely complex geometry of living tensegrity is made much simpler in its application because we move like humans and we move within the round because we're designed to spiral and turn. We are not designed to walk like a robot. And this is challenging. So when we show you this as a reflection of what we forgot. You forgot where you came from. You forgot how you grew yourself. You became an adult. You learned anatomy from the dead. And you look at the living in front of you like they're a machine. And you break them into parts and pieces. And you do your magic on the part and pieces and try to reinvest it in the global structure. But if you take a step back and you look at the whole structure in its completeness first, you'll start to recognize that issues they're feeling in a particular area are often a victim of inefficient movement of the wholeness. And then you have a totally different strategy then for influencing and reorganizing and helping somebody adapt more appropriately so they become more efficient, they become stronger, and they attain much more longevity. And that's our ultimate goal, right? Because everybody lives longer now. Everybody wants to live longer and look more youthful. But in our aspirations to reach these dizzying heights of 100 plus, but still look 22, we torture ourselves with all sorts of chemicals and injections and training protocols and diets. But we forget the organic tissue we're made of and that the health of our viscera require us to treat ourselves in an organic, biological way. And movement should be omnidirectional, effortless, skillful, not aggressive and harsh like your Instagram motivators would have you believe.
All right, so that is a very scraping the surface of 21st century anatomy and physiology. I would like to just add that we go for maybe nearly 2.5 hours on that in the actual training module, which does lead us very nicely onto joints. So Paul opens this module. I think your opening words to this were, there are no joints, which is true.
It's a big statement to say though, yes?
Yes. And most
because you have to get people's attention. You have to get people's attention because they've been told there are joints. Remember, we just spoke about the adult skeleton that is pinned together behind them. And they've been taught by the tutor that this elbow does flexion and extension. And it does it in this sagittal plane. And then you have a coronal plane. And you can go transverse. And we break it down into these structures that are basically from carpentry and the building world. And rightly so, because 500 years ago, you reflected what you learned on things you could see around you. And that's why we use beams and columns and pulleys and contractions of opposition to feel like we're moving our muscles like this in opposite directions. But in reality, that's not true at all. That's not how your body self-constructed itself. It grew itself from the one and from within itself. Nobody came on the outside and attached pins and bolts to it. Not that that can't happen surgically, because that can happen. They can put things inside you and often do. And sometimes necessarily, because modern medicine is incredible. However, joints, if you understand what the definition of a joint is, it means to take two separate parts and connect them together. But you were never separated, you were never disconnected. Your body grew areas that allowed shape change to occur. So you could change your height and speed and your constraints and your ability to expand within the environment you live and host yourself, so that you can interact and pick fruit, dig holes, build things, go on a computer, play sports. But joints don't exist like you see in an X-ray. You have your X-ray and you go, oh my God, there's a space there. They must be connected, but they grew together. And once you understand that they grew together and they grew in a specific way and had specific characteristics, that there isn't actually a joint. There is just an area where shape change can occur because there are no origin insertions in the body. Although you're taught that on your traditional academics, so it gives us a foundation of mapping of the body, it's incorrect, because you cannot bring an insertion closer to an origin if they don't exist, because you are completely one. Makes sense? Things don't oppose each other. Things are symbiotic and work together. Yes, and unfortunately, people stress their joints because they attack them, thinking they have this movement of opposition that they can really enhance and encapsulate in their training. And ultimately, what they do, they put so much strain in these areas that they lose the ability to have shape change there.
Yeah.
So it's just a different view. If you look at the available space within you and look at why that has been lost over time, and over time of poor adaptation to your choices of movement and your choices in the health and fitness industry, or your choices to trauma, and these things happen, yes, then you go, I need to restore the space there. I need to restore the virtual space so that I get a much more homeostatic effect of me. I must make sure that I'm not attacking these spaces and asking them to perform inappropriately, because you'll lose them. And once you lose the space, you then have pathology, and now you're in deep shit.
Yeah.
Makes sense? And we often do this. We close the space doing your chest press. You close the space when you're doing your abs and your sit-ups. You close the space when you excessively squat. It's not that these movements are inappropriate. They're just applied inappropriately. Makes sense? Repetitively. And it's an accumulative effect. So it's very important that we keep our eyes open and we see where these spaces are being infringed upon, and where we're applying too much of a constraint to an area that should have much more freedom to maneuver.
Yeah.
And we go into much more detail and we show you demonstrations of that. Because once you see it, you'll never see it the same again.
No. Paul, can you briefly explain this slide? Because I think it could be quite confusing to some people.
Well, this is the lifespan of yourself. Yes, and you want to look at the two extremes. There are extremes in nature. Yes, so the guy in the middle, yes, this is nature. He doesn't go to a gym. There's no fitness first in the middle of the forest. He has to do what he needs to do to survive. Yes, so you need an adequate amount of mobility. Call it flexibility if you wish, but you must have an adequate amount of movement at your spaces so you can interact for whatever action you are designed to do specifically for yourself. Likewise, you must have enough strength and protection and muscular dominance so you can perform activities healthily. Yes, but you must understand the two of them are intertwined in this incredible term that John Sharkey and Joan Avison created called fascia integrity. Fascia being the medium that you're made up of, and the integrity is the living forces that must exist within the fabric of your natural architecture. And you want to know that you have a combination of both. But if you go to the extremes of either, you will then need the healthcare service. Period. Makes sense? There's no vet in the forest. Life exists because it's alive, and they act naturally. We are the only creature on the planet that seeks to injure ourselves on purpose in the pursuit of health and fitness. This is mental. Yes, if you're a commando, you must work hard to reach that green beret. Yes, you must torture yourself to achieve these extreme endurance effects. But you're expendable. You're not going to be a commando forever. You're going to do it for a short period of time, do your job, get your green beret, get a few medals, and have a cup of tea. Job done. But if you want to live a long life, you must make sure that you can train and have longevity. Yes, and unfortunately, we base an awful lot of our training protocols on our sporting entertainment world, don't we? And all of our elite athletes end their career within their early 30s. Yes, so we want to make sure that we're not basing our movement choices on the short-term successes of our elite entertainers who will be replaced by the younger version of themselves. Yes, so that we want to make sure that we don't suffer the same fate. that we encourage ourselves to enjoy ourselves and enjoy our bodies to whatever capacity you want to, but understand the consequences of either extreme. For instance, last week I have a 25-year-old prima ballerina come in, and she's only done ballet for 20 years. She's asked her body to perform at the highest level and is doing so. But her body's had enough because she's only ever stayed at this end. She's only a ballerina. She doesn't have any muscular mass. She doesn't have a good sense of understanding of the consequences of a training protocol for 20 years. And she has compromised the living forces which encapsulate the medium and architectural fabric that she is. It is now compromised, and her sensory system is telling her so by hurting her, and it's preventing her performing because her body has got to its end, its threshold of ability to adapt effectively. So now the adaptation is of a negative connotation, and it's now preventing her performing. And unfortunately, people are not aware of the consequences of their choices. And this is where people often end up seeking help when they've reached that threshold. Rather than we educating ourselves and educating our clients on a daily, week to week, yearly basis, and making sure that we train them better based on a better model of physiology so we can manage the consequences and head off this threshold for as long as possible, which means you're now an instructor. You're not just a tape recording of a course you learned that you're mimicking.
Yeah. Okay. Let's briefly touch on everyone that thinks that's a typo, the pelvic foot. So this was, I think, if I had to pick a favorite module, I really struggled. For me, this was the one where most students went, wow, because they've been taught this biomechanical approach to the pelvic floor, which I know we've moved away from because it's not a floor for a start. It's not just here, which is in the ramus of the pelvis. We are one, as you said before.
So again, it's when you have all this theory, and that's why it's so important you understand your academic past, so you can see the evolution and why we've done this research to bring us to this current 21st century understanding. And this is just an artist's impression of the pelvic floor. And because, of course, our whole existence relies on babies being created. And so we've, of course, had a lot of time and invested money into trying to understand this area as much as possible. And there's been a lot of conflicting research and conflicting ideas. But the bedrock has been that your pelvic floor is a fist and you'll Kegel exercise it to squeeze it to control it, assuming that it's all red muscle. Well, we know because you grew yourself from an embryonic basis that your pelvis did not grow itself in isolation. It is part of a global structure. Your wholeness of yourself is responsible for how your pelvis reacts, adapts, and performs. And what unfortunately has happened in the 21st century, we have got incredibly lazy because convenience has ensued around our world. We don't live in these euphoric islands where we walk all the time. We pick our fruit, we dig our holes, we create and cultivate our own agriculture. We don't talk to each other much. There's no Netflix on these islands. We live in these metropolises where we barely move around for 30 minutes a day. We just arrive at our location. We sit there for 8 to 12 hours. We get back in a seated position. We go back to where we came from. We sit at lunch or go out on a meal at the Dubai Marina. We have a glass of wine. Then we go for 1 hour, maybe if you're lucky, to a training facility to unravel the abuse we ask our body to tolerate and say, I'm fit. And then what you'll do, you'll put your flip-flops on and you'll go into the mall and you'll walk around in flip-flops and you'll shuffle and you'll convince yourself that you look glamorous because you've had a pedicure and you're showing off your nails. And what we absolutely know, if you're not walking, jumping, springing, bouncing, your living tissue loses its ability to have elastic recoil. So the health of your pelvic floor 100% requires you to move your feet. And how you move your foot and your talus joint in particular is embodiment of health, because the poorer that relationship of the ankle and the mirroring effect that each ankle has on each hip and pelvic girdle, then you're going to see that you have dysfunction. So regardless of how you train, above your shins higher, if your ankle moves poorly, then regardless of effect, you're going to move everything else in a poor way. It is imperative that you work on your feet and your ankles. You don't allow your structural architecture to dictate your movement. You learn positioning of the foot. You understand how to reinforce, not yet. You learn how to reinforce your pelvic girdle by making sure your foot is alive during exercise, that your sensory system is innervated, so that you recognize what you're asking these forces to transmit through your body, and they're going to do it more efficiently and effectively. Rather than your pelvic floor fall apart and you become incontinent and you have a poor sex life and you get vaginal, where you get prolapses through your vaginal and your bladder, all because you don't have spring in your step. So my key to the pelvic foot, and it's the biggest one I have in all of the studios, is stop wearing flip-flops. If your heel is not connected to your foot, you cannot push. You can only drag. And if you're dragging your leg along the floor, you're dragging your ass along the floor, and you can't push. And if you can't push, you can't tension. If you can't tension, you can't create that elastic recoil that your pelvis requires to create bounce, to maintain your internal positioning of your viscera, to encourage external and internal rotational forces to be distributed efficiently and effortlessly, that your bones counter rotate as they're meant to in this lovely synchronized fashion, all because you wear flip-flops. This is mental. So it's called the pelvic foot for a reason. If your foot is a disaster, your pelvis will fall out. And all the Kegel exercises in the world it's like peeing in the wind and wondering why you just didn't turn around and do the other direction. I don't know how else to say it.
There's knowledge bombs like that throughout the 12 weeks. Particularly
Well, we can sugarcoat a cake, yes, but if the cake is rubbish, it's still a flipping rubbish cake, right? So it's really important that we go, hang on, what are we talking about and why are we bothering? Because this is really important. Not everybody will have the same muscular constraints in the pelvis. Yes, and the same in the diaphragm. Some people, have you heard of the word myofascia?
Mm-hmm.
It means exactly that, muscle fascia. Yes, and there are many types of fascia. Yes, but there's only one type of muscle that is voluntary contracting.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, what that means is, though, some people are made up of more myo than they are fascia, and some people are made up of more fascia than they are of myo because of how they use their body, because of how adaptation was encouraged, whether they chose to or not, or whether they were aware or not. But our job as movement people is to understand, so we can see how they have this lovely integration of movement from the ground through their body and out through their arms, so they can produce effortless motion. But all too often, we focus training lying down, in supine or prone, yes, and then wonder why we struggle standing up.
So true.
Time for a change.
So true. And it's one of the key reasons why we are not sponsored by Javianas. Okay, vegans, look away now. That is a pace of fillet steak. Am I wrong? It is, right?
Yes, it was one of my fillet steaks. It's delicious.
But Paul put it on here. He did a great presentation called Stretching Why Not? Okay, and it's mainly for those people that love to stretch their hip flexors, very closely linked to the pelvic floor musculature and tissue, and how these two things go hand in hand. You overstretching, over lengthening, essentially abusing the hip flexors and the psoas has more effect than just really loosey-goosey hips. It has a direct effect on the pelvic floor. It has a direct effect on the diaphragm and your breath, and therefore the thoracic. Okay, so
but moreover, and more importantly, you cannot stretch red tissue.
Yeah.
It's simple as that. You cannot stretch red tissue. You can only damage and challenge poorly the architectural tissue that the red proteins live within, which is that fascial matrix. But even more than that, you're not stretching these tissues when you're stretching. You're stretching your neurology. You're challenging the very essence of what it means to control movement, which is your nervous system. You're overpowering your body's ability to protect itself. The reason it feels tight is because it feels the area is threatened. Whether it is a dehydration, it is a poor nutrition, it is trauma, there is micro tearing, there is pathology, whatever the reason is that your body has tightened something, it's to protect that area because of how you're moving or choosing to use it. If it slackens and you get that euphoric sensation of, but I like stretching because it makes me feel better. Well, congratulations. Drug dealers say the same thing. Understanding the quality of pleasure and why you get it is really important before you choose to seek it and then abuse that sensation. And what that means is when you're getting that body and you get to that area where your body gives in and it allows itself to access these excessive boundaries to integrity, what happens is your body releases a hormone because you ignored the tension effect. You ignored the tightening sensation you got in your sensory system, which lives within the fascial matrix. Yes, your sensory tissue lives within the fascia. Your muscular motor receptors live in muscle proteins. So it's the sensory system that's trying to stop you. And then it goes, well, you're not listening. So it releases a hormone, and a hormone that you get in orgasms called endocannabinoid. You're not going to go run a marathon after you've had an orgasm. You sit down and have 26. You relax. But people are seeking out this pleasure and thinking it's a benefit to lengthening tissue. And what it is your body saying, you didn't listen to one protective mechanism. Here's my other option, because it can only do one or the other. So, for instance, I use these Hoberman spheres a lot to explain the physiology of your tissue. Each piece of it is exactly the same size. Each piece is the same. But look, if I pull it, it changes shape. If I push it, it changes shape. But none of the pieces change length. Do you understand? So there's a barrier. I can go from A and I can go to B. But if I go to C, I go beyond it. I have to break the relationships of the very elements that allow it to change shape. The mechanism will break. So what you want to understand is that it should always be moving. And you explore boundaries and the quality of how you get there and recognize where your boundaries are, your own. Yes? And that's why you cannot stretch living tissue. The very nature of it is to stop you getting here to this stiffening. Yes, see what it happens when this one's broken on purpose because it gets you so far and it won't let me bring it back. It stiffens and it's broken. Yes, because I can't stop it. So it seizes. So I have to crush it to make it come back in. That's what happens to your body. If stretching was so good, there would be no reason to cut babies out of vaginas. Your body would just allow it to come out like the bomb days of a bomber. It would just fall out and bungee jump. The very nature you have to intervene is because your body's defending. It's got to the boundary. It needs drugs and medical team to go in and help and then stitch it back up later. If it worked, jiu-jitsu couldn't work, Fernanda. If stretching worked, jiu-jitsu, you would never submit. You would go, oh, yes, please, take my arm further. It'd be like the most amazing massage. It'd be very different, right? The Gracies would have created a very different product. So understanding that your body has these self-defense mechanisms that we can utilize to our benefit, or we can take them to their extremes. But that's why you then have to deal with the consequences of going to the extreme. So it's not that you don't want to move to your boundaries. You absolutely do. But you need to recognize where they are and what your body is telling you when you get there. Does that make sense? Because for you to stretch that piece of fillet, you need a great big hammer and some knives. And remember, we've removed all of the surrounding environment that it lives within. And we've removed its relationship to the skeletal part of the system and the tendinous part and the ligamentous part and the connective tissue and the fascial environment and the fat and the skin. So you see it. But imagine it's in amongst all of that. There is no way you're designed to stretch. Otherwise, you would never get stretch marks. They're a direct reflection of damaging yourself.
Yeah. The pelvic foot, I think, is a 2.5-hour training module. It goes on for a long time because there's so many elements to cover. So we talk about the common issues. We talk about what we mean when we say dysfunction. What happens when we focus on that so-called dysfunction? And we talk about obviously the areas that we should be concentrating on in order to help perhaps a dysfunctional pelvis along. We try to get away from the word dysfunctional, and we come up with suggestions on what that might be. The hand, Paul describes it really well. Sorry, the foot should move like the hand. It often doesn't because we lock it away in a shoe, or we wear flip-flops. Which,
well, if you don't let your foot expand, it can't feel the surface it's trying to go on. Of course, we like comfort. We put our feet in shoes and we close it and we trap it and they cross over and we distort and the bones adapt to that pressure, which is why you end up with bunions and all sorts of pathology of your feet, which then they'll go in happily for you and trim them off with a saw and reposition them with a pin, and they'll try and recreate the architecture. But your foot should be able to spread. Your toes should be able to maneuver. You're not a bird. You're not trying to grab onto anything. And unless you need to. But if you can only grab, then you don't need to push, which means your bum will become inhibited, which means your pelvis cannot react properly to the pressure within. So it just collapses. So there's a reason a horse has a magnificent ass, because it pushes so much. And there's a reason birds have wings, because they have claws. They don't do the same.
yeah.
And you have to decide what you want to be. Are we a walker? Yes. Or are we a shuffler, like a penguin? Makes sense.
Oh, so much information in so little time. All right, guys. So you may have joined today because you wanted to hear Paul, you wanted to see me giggle at his silly jokes. You want to be an extraordinary silly jokes. No, fantastic jokes. You wanted to become an extraordinary instructor. You feel a bit stuck where you are, any of those things. There is something that made you sign up for today's masterclass. You wouldn't just waste an hour of your time listening to us if there wasn't that key reason why you joined today. Here's what you know about now. You know, oh, Ellie just came in. She's missed a little bit. About you now know about 21st century anatomy, or briefly about it, the pelvic foot and joints. We obviously cover a lot more in Thrive, and we would absolutely love for you to come on our next intake, which is kicking off very, very soon. We keep up to date. Paul is always going off and cutting up dead people, aren't you, Paul? You're on mute. Paul, you're on mute.
Italy is next. I go away every year, and I do cadavers every year. I encourage you all to come on one of them. The John Sharkey at ntc.ie. You'll get all the details. He has one in London, one in Italy, where I'll be with Maria. She's doing her first one in June. Then we have one in South Africa, and then we have one in America at the end of the year. I'll be at that one as well.
Amazing. So what we really want out of Thrive is to create a community of instructors who are constantly evolving, constantly moving away from a cookie cutter method, being what we call a McDonald's instructor, and moving towards becoming that Michelin star chef and working with the ingredients that are in front of you, aka your clients. They all present differently. They all come in differently. They all react differently. And it's really your job as an instructor to be able to adapt your teaching and your cueing towards that. But if you don't understand what we're made of and how we work or move, then you're not going to be able to adapt to that, because you're only going to have one cookie cutter method. And that's pretty much, in a nutshell, why we created Thrive. So listen to Emma if you don't want to listen to me. I don't mind. She's been there, she's done it. And she would say, if you're a bit lost, which I know I felt like that in the past, and you want to deal with the people in front of you, Thrive will help you. We've also got loads of other, we ask everyone at the end of Thrive to do a quick testimonial with us. And it's not so much for us to have something to put forward to future students. I mean, it is a little bit, but it's also to get the guys like Emma, like I think I just did one with a lady called Monica from India, who give us feedback on how we can make Thrive better, because we want to evolve it and make it the best it can possibly be out there, the best course going, but also to get the students to reflect on what they've learned and just how far they've come and will continue to go when the 12 weeks is over. So what is Thrive? Well, in case you hadn't realized, it's a 12 weeks intensive training. So we go for roughly 2 hours each week. Now, these are pre-recorded trainings that Paul and I got done over lockdown, because there was very little else to do during lockdown, let's be honest. So we jumped online and we did the training modules. So they are pre-recorded. They get drip fed to you each week, and they are just knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb. In between each of those training modules, we do a live weekly Q&A and movement session. These go for around 90 minutes, give or take. Sometimes we will run over, but the minimum is about 90 minutes. And this is where we really take the theory of the weekly training modules and put into practice with some movements. So we'll be doing, I don't really love to call it a workout, but a movement experience each week, based on what you learned and you experienced in the theoretical module. We also will answer any questions you have. So it's a Q&A. It really is more of a discussion, isn't it, Paul, than a Q&A.
Exactly. That's the whole point, that you have this continuing conversation. So you don't, when you will feel lost, you will feel confused, and you'll want to, how do I express it? And that's the reason it's a continuous conversation that we have. So there's always plenty of time to bring clarity to what you're learning and how you then utilize it and implement it.
Yeah. You get downloadable notes, which you can download, and then they're yours forever. You can print them off, you can scribble on them, you can do whatever you want with them. We realize that it is a hell of a lot of information to take on all in 12 weeks, which is why we decided to be nice and give you access to all the trainings and the live Q&A recordings for 12 months. So it's not over after 12 weeks. It's actually just the beginning. It's a springboard to go, oh, now I have a client with neurological issues this week. I'm going to dive into that neurological module again, and you might come up with something you can try with that client and experience with that client. We also have a Facebook page. Listen, I know Facebook is not my favorite place to be either, but it's the one place where we can go. People post questions on there. People post experiences on there. Paul and I are both on there to jump in if you need guidance or help. But it's, again, it's that community that we've created. So it's really, really awesome. Now, all of this, if you were to come to us and go, I want to pay for an hour of your time, would cost you an absolute fortune, I'll be honest. All right. But so you get basically nearly 4 hours a week contact time with Paul and I'll tell you about that in a moment, for either a one-off payment of £2,000. Sorry, this is all done in pounds. We're never going to please anyone with one currency, but we also, you can do a middle one if you want to. If you want to pay us over 12 months, we realize that that is much more manageable. So there is a payment option to pay over 12 months too. You're not penalized. It's not more. If you do 167 times 12, it works out to about 2,000. So we don't penalize anyone for paying over that time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you now. And I would love to go to questions, because I know that we've thrown a lot at you already today. And while you guys are either unmuting yourselves to ask questions or typing them in the chat, whatever you are most comfortable with, I am going to put a link in the chat, which is where you can go and sign up to join us on the next intake of Thrive. If you sign up today, there it is. The link is in the chat right now. If you sign up today, we've got a free presentation that we will give you access to. It's only available for the next 24 hours, which is Paul's Stretching Why Not? That's only if you sign up today. I'm afraid that offer ends at midnight tonight. I will be strict on that one. Awa says, love the metaphor. Do you want to be a bird or a horse? I think that should be one of our apparel t-shirts, like bird, question mark, turn around, horse, question mark. Guys, are there any questions? Please feel free to unmute and ask. We love a bit of interaction.
I tell you what I'll add to it while you're thinking is we are always getting together. So again, if you're doing it and you've done it, or you're doing more training with whoever it is, we're always getting together and hooking up online, because this online community is brilliant. There's no, as long as you get the time zones right, it's easy to access, and we go over things. So it's not just within Thrive itself. The Thrive is the 12 weeks, but after it forever. I'm already in the middle of doing it once a month with a group of girls who are wanting a bit more clarity, and they're going through the material again. I help them out all the time. And what's really cool is as our community grows, it overlaps into other communities around the world. We're doing a similar thing with similar mentors like us. And we've got Brazil and Canada and France and New Zealand, and they're all interlinking because we're all taking on the academic traditional bias that is currently out there, and we're really challenging it because we think it's for the best. But this tomorrow it is one of our graduates. She's passed and she's doing super well, and she's having such a great effect in her own community. The local medical guys are like, "How are you doing it?" And she's really struggling to explain it. Even though when you ask her, she explains it perfectly, but she's just not confident to do it in that sort of audience. So I said, "Well, I'll come and hold her hand." And she says, "No, no, no, come do a workshop." I says, "I'll only do it if you're at the front, because it's really important that we show solidarity and support each other." So yes, I'm happy to do a presentation to anybody anywhere in the world, but if it's your community, you need to be front and center, because you're the one who's delivering that work there in that community, and I'm just here to support you. And the fact that you've taken this information and you're utilizing it and you're having such a really dramatic impact, you get the credit for that. It's really important. So I promise you, if you need any help whatsoever, if you ask, I'll fly anywhere in the world to help you. But you have to stand shoulder to shoulder with me, because then I'll stand with you, but you must stand with me and stand up front. And that's happening tomorrow. And then we're going to make sure the medical community are very happy with what she's doing. They just don't know how, and they don't know why it's so different. So I'll go over, I'll do a 4-hour presentation. I think it's their general plan. And there'll be a lot of practical, there'll be a lot of argy-bargies, there'll be a lot of discussion. But hopefully we just make sure that we embed ourselves within these communities so it becomes less diverse, what's the word I'm looking for, adversarial, and more of a community where we collaborate, because that's what we ultimately want. We want it for the benefit of our clientele, right? Whether it's medical or fitness, we want them both to enjoy the knowledge that we're sharing so that everybody gets the best out of it. So that's happening tomorrow. I'll let you know how that goes.
Amazing. Yes. Let us know how it goes. Like Paul says, we've got this Facebook group. And again, Facebook, not my favorite place to be. And I know it's not great for everybody. But the girls on there from, I think, 2 Thrive intakes ago, there's 4 of them, I think, Paul, aren't there, that really get together and they go, right, can you give us your feedback of what we now know? And we'll happily go and help them out, ask and answer questions, sit in on a session. And so you don't just have us for the 12 weeks and then we leave your life and we're gone forever and we've run off and we're teaching somebody else. It's like, as Paul said, it's that community where we're constantly evolving together. We're constantly growing together. And we will always be there to have that conversation with you. Heather says, thank you both. Lots of food for thought. You're most welcome, Heather. We hope that you can join us on the other side on Thrive. The link that I've put in there, guys, that will let you know all the dates as well. The days of the lives, the times of the lives, when we have our mini break, which just happens to coincide with when Paul's flying to Italy. Shocking. We actually do, if we wanted to, whether we wanted to go on holiday or not, we would have a mini break halfway through for about 2 weeks, because it gets a little bit information overwhelm if we just go with all 12 modules each week, bang. So we would take a mini break anyway, but often one of us is traveling, so it just coincides with that. Any other questions, guys? Anything to add? Anybody?
Fernando, you look like you're about to type something. Say it out loud. What about?
No. Are you going to? Oh, there she is.
Really good presentation. Thank you so much. It was crystal clear. No doubts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, that accent's getting better.
I'm practicing a little bit of Portuguese. Porque fala Portuguese.
Oh,
I can't just go to Brazil and swear. That's all I know. I've got to learn something. It's all Maria taught me for the first few years. Every swear word has ever been invented.
That's brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. If you do have any questions after the event, you have both of our emails, or at least you have mine. You can email me, and if it's a question for Paul or that he needs to answer, I will pass it on to him. If you have any questions and you're not sure about Thrive after going to that link and reading all about it, then again, please email me. I'll be happy to either jump on a call with you to answer the questions or email you to answer the questions. I want to make this decision super easy for you. All right. Thank you so much, ladies.
Can I just ask very, very briefly, when you do the Q&A or the movement sesh, what is that usually, does that change weekly or stays the same on the schedule?
No, it stays consistent. So for example, the first one, I've got my very archaic
Sorry,
paper
thank
here.
you.
No, the first one is scheduled on the 30th of March, which is a Thursday at this time, 1 p.m. Gulf Standard Time. Whereabouts are you, Catherine?
She's here.
Oh no, I'm here in Dubai. Yeah. I work the weekends, so that's why that Q&A part is going to be really, really valuable. So I can annoy you with lots of delicious questions.
We love delicious questions.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
that
amazing.
what we say for those Q&As, although they're labeled as being 90 minutes, so that you don't miss anything, we always say to set aside 2 hours for it because we often run over. Okay, so
Not a problem. Exciting.
They will happen every week on a Thursday from the 30th of March. Your training modules will be drip fed to you from the minute you sign up. So if you sign up today, you'll have access to module 1 today. You can get going straight away. And then each week after that, they're drip fed to you. And I then, after we've done 5 Q&As, email you through the recording link to them. And then at the end, I give you a massive spreadsheet of all 12 of them. So you have access to those.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so very much. That was super cool.
No
that
worries.
was so good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. If there are no other questions, I will say goodbye, wish you a pleasant weekend, and I will get the recording through to you by the end of the day. Thank you so much, Paul.
My pleasure. Take care, gang.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.